And when Valinor was full wrought, and the mansions of the Valar were established, in the midst of the plain beyond the mountains they built their city, Valmar of many bells. Before its western gate there was a green mound, Azelohar, that is named also Coralaire, and Yavanna hallowed it, and she sat there long upon the green grass and sang a song of power, in which was set all her thought of things that grow in the earth. But Nienna thought in silence and watered the mold with tears. In that time the Valar were gathered together to hear the song of Yavanna, and they sat silent upon their thrones of council in the Mahanaxar, the ring of doom, near to the golden gates of Valmar. And Yavanna Kementári sang before them, and they watched. And as they watched, upon the mound there came forth two slender shoots, and silence was over all the world in that hour, nor was there any other sound save the chanting of Yavanna. Under her song the saplings grew and became fair and tall, and came to flower, and thus there awoke in the world the two trees of Valinor. Of all things which Yavanna made they have most renown, and about their fate all the tales of the elder days are woven. The one had leaves of dark green, that beneath were as shining silver, and from each of his countless flowers a dew of silver light was ever falling, and the earth beneath was dappled with the shadows of his fluttering leaves. The other bore leaves of a young green, like the new-opened beech. Their edges were of glittering gold. Flowers swung upon her branches in clusters of yellow flame, formed each to a glowing horn that spilled a golden rain upon the ground, and from the blossom of that tree there came forth warmth and a great light. Telperion the one was called in Valinor, and Silpion, and Nincalote, and many other names. But Laurelin the other was, and Malinalda, and Calurian, and many names in song beside. In 7 hours the glory of each tree waxed to full and waned again to naught, and each awoke once more to life an hour before the other ceased to shine. Thus in Valinor twice every day there came a gentle hour of softer light, when both trees were faint and their gold and silver beams were mingled. Telperion was the elder of the trees, and came first to full stature and to bloom. And that first hour in which he shone, the white glimmer of a silver dawn, the Valar reckoned not into the tale of hours, but named it the opening hour, and counted from it the ages of their reign in Valinor. Therefore at the 6th hour of the first day, and of all the joyful days thereafter, until the darkening of Valinor, Telperion ceased his time of flower, and at the 12th hour Laurelin her blossoming. And each day of the Valar and Aman contained 12 hours, and ended with the second mingling of the lights, in which Laurelin was waning, but Telperion was waxing. But the light that was spilled from the trees endured long, ere it was taken up into the airs or sank down into the earth. And the dews of Telperion, and the rain that fell from Laurelin, Varda hoarded in great vats like shining lakes, that were to all the land of the Valar as wells of water and of light. Thus began the days of the bliss of Valinor, and thus began also the count of time. Welcome, I am Professor Rachel Fulton Brown, and this is the Forge of Tolkien. Trees of Light? Isn't that a little bit Jewish? So I found some comments on Vox's blog when the Melkor episode posted, right? And JM was asking, just curious, what's with the silver tree, Jewish candelabra logo? How did it become associated with Tolkien? He's of course referring to the badge that we have on the videos, right? The tree that opens every video, and the badge that was on down in the corner there when I was reading that story. So what is it with those trees? Well, Snidely Whiplash gave a very accurate answer, so thank you. But there is actually something in JM's question, and that's what I'd like to talk about today. In fact, JM's question is somewhat more accurate than you might imagine. Think about it. Why trees of light. You could say, okay, wait, do trees have, I mean, maybe they're light when they're catching on fire. Why wouldn't you have some other forms of illumination for for Arda, where Varda, oh good grief, now I've gotten confused already, and I've only just started. Right, Varda is singing in Arda and making light happen. I realized when I was reading the opening passage, I stumbled there when Yavanna sat there long upon the green grass and sang a song of power, and I wanted to say prayer, and that gives you a clue where I'm going to as well. So Yavanna sings these trees into life, and they give forth light. The silver light, Telperion, the elder of the trees, and he has the dew of silver light that falls, and Laurelin is always giving forth this golden light. And in Valinor, during the time of the trees, they wax and wane, so that there's this period when they mingle, and then one takes over after the other. So in fact, in Valinor, during the time of the two trees, there's never darkness, right? There's just this lovely silver and gold light. Why did Tolkien use trees as his light source? Well, if you know your Silmarillion, you know, of course, that the original lights in Arda were not, in fact, the trees, but lamps, right? There were two mighty lamps for the lighting of Middle-earth, and Varda filled the lamps, and Manwë hallowed them, and the Valar set them on high pillars. One lamp they raised near the north of Middle-earth, and it was named Iluin, and the other was raised in the south, and it was named Ormal, and the light of the lamps of the Valar flowed out over the earth, so that all was lit, as it were, in a changeless day, right? So in the very beginning of days, when the Ainur have entered into the creation, what they've set up first are two lamps. But Morgoth, who has also entered into the creation, comes and breaks those lamps because he's filled with hatred, being jealous of the work of his peers, whom he desired to make subject to himself. And when he comes in, Melkor, trusting in the strength of his citadel, Utumno, and the might of his servants, came forth suddenly to war and struck the first blow ere the Valar were prepared, and he assailed the lights of Iluin and Ormal and cast down their pillars and broke their lamps. So the original light of Arda was just these two pillar lamps, and it's after Melkor destroys those lamps, and in the overthrow, lands are broken, the seas are rose in tumult, the shape of Arda is marred at the very beginning. So the two trees are in fact not the oldest lights, as it were, in the creation, but they that they are there in the beginning of time, right? That the days of the bliss of Valinor, and thus began the count of time, because you have the changing light between the silver and gold between the two trees. So we have the original light was just like the lamps, which is continuous, and they're changeless, right? A changeless day. Melkor destroys those lamps, and then we have the two trees made. I still haven't solved it anything, right? It's like I'll be a more and more particular. Well, no. What's interesting is that the original light is just light, right? It's like as if let there be light, and the second light is this mingling of lights, but they're still coming from trees. And notice, this is very important. We have no sun and moon yet, right? Which is also fascinating. Okay, so Yavanna sings the two trees into being, and Varda, that's Albereth, right? Varda hoards their light, as it were, in great vats like shining lakes. So Varda makes these massive pools of light and holds the light from the two trees. So it's a living light. It's literally a living light, and it's from about their fate, the fate of these two trees, all the tales of the elder days are woven. Well, wait a minute, I thought the book was called the Silmarillion. Okay, I'm leaping ahead a bit because we haven't introduced the elves properly, but we need to understand why, in fact, all the stories of the elder days are woven around these two trees. And in truth, the story of the Lord of the Rings is also bound up with the story of the trees, as Snidely points out. When there was somebody else in there, I'm sorry, I forgot to write down your name, that there was a conversation in the comments on Vox's blog about what the two trees are, and one reader pointed out that they are the candelabra image in the logo is a reference to the White Tree of Gondor, and Snidely said, no, not quite. Yes and no, right? It's this whole lineage of trees, and the badge that we use for the show is the Gondorian badge, but that white tree is in fact descended in complicated ways, and not directly, from these two trees. So it's accurate to say that the story of the Silmarillion and the story of the Lord of the Rings is all bound up with the fate of these trees. Well, how? Why is the book called The Silmarillion when it should be called The Two Trees? Aha! Okay, so remember that making of things is a great mystery for Tolkien throughout his stories, right? And so here we've just had Yavanna sing the trees into being. The music of creation is still there. So Yavanna chants, and the trees grow and give forth their flowers and fruit and their light. Once the Valar are going to make a choice about inviting the elves to come live with them in Valinor, and some of the elves come and some don't, and that's going to be the great story of the wandering of the elves, what Verlyn Flieger has beautifully described in her Splintered Light as the splintering of the light as shown by the journeys of the elves. But the first thing they have to do is be invited by the Valar to come live in Valinor with the Ainur, with the Valar. And of those who come, the Fëanor is one of the greatest, right? I think he's born there, right? Gosh darn it. I wish I had an absolutely perfect memory for everything, but what I have is a story memory, so everything gets tangled up in my stories. He's born there, right? He's the eldest son of Finwë, and his mother wastes away. He's so fiery after in his birth that Miriel is the only one from Valinor that ends up in the halls of Mandos. Died after Fëanor's birth. So we'll get to that. We'll get to all of the particularities of the elves and exactly what the Noldor are and so forth. But right now, what matters is that Fëanor is the great apprentice, I suppose, of Aula, and is filled with knowledge of making, and it comes into his... It's a thought. I was going to say desire. He's filled with a new thought, right? So Tolkien's talking about inspiration, that he wants to preserve the light from the trees, right? So he's there living with the Valar and the other Noldor, and he wants somehow to capture the light, not in the way that Varda's doing it in those vats, right? Pools of water and light. You can think of obviously water catches light, so we have that image of the sort of living, moving light. What Fëanor wants to do is preserve the glory of the blessed realm, the light of the trees, imperishable, right? Then he began a long and secret labor, and he summoned all his lore and his power, his subtle skill, and at the end of all he made the Silmarils. Okay, so the Silmarils are in fact tied up with the trees. How exactly? What do you know about the Silmarils? Well, they're basically diamonds. Right, so imagine for yourself a diamond, right, that sparkles with light. And Tolkien is starting from there. He's starting from... it's interesting that these are... the Silmarils are going to be a clear crystal that's brilliant with light, because in fact diamonds are only a more modern form of gemstone. That in the Middle Ages they do rock crystal, which I'll get to probably if I pull all the ties of the story together here. I had a nightmare last night that someone made a comment and was like, Rachel, can't you make these arguments more direct? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't. They just, the weave of story just happens, all right? So you're going to have to stay with me. That if Tolkien properly were doing this as a more medieval story, the Silmarils probably would have been a different color. For example, green, like the emeralds, like the green stone that Aragorn makes sure Bilbo puts in the Song of Arundel. It's interesting because green and the green stones are associated with Aragorn because he's the elf stone, he's the Elessar. Why aren't the Silmarils green, right? But they're not. They're crystal, and this is what they look like. And it really, really matters. So I need you to listen closely here what these Silmarils look like. As 3 great jewels they were in form, but not until the end, when Fëanor shall return, who perished ere the sun was made, and sits now in the halls of awaiting, and comes no more among his kin. Not until the sun passes and the moon falls shall it be known of what substance they were made. It's mysterious, and notice they're being made before the sun and the moon. The sun and moon don't exist yet either. And Fëanor, for reasons, ends up in the halls of waiting because the elves end up with, you're going to need a lot of elven lore to understand all of this. Elves believe in resurrection, or not resurrection, reincarnation, different from resurrection. Believe in reincarnation, and because they're immortal in a sense that they can never leave Arda. Don't worry about that right now. The sun and the moon don't exist yet, and yet Fëanor's making these gemstones, and yet there's a mystery as to what their substance is, right? We don't know what their substance is. Like the crystal of diamonds, it appeared, and yet was more strong than adamant, so that no violence could mar it or break it within the kingdom of Arda. Yet that crystal was to the Silmarils but as is the body to the children of Iluvatar, the house of its inner fire that is within it, and yet in all parts of it, and is its life. And the inner fire of the Silmarils Fëanor made of the blended light of the trees of Valinor, which lives in them yet, though the trees have long since withered and shine no more. Therefore, even in the darkness of the deepest treasury, the Silmarils of their own radiance shine like the stars of Varda. And yet, as they were indeed living things, they rejoiced in light and received it and gave it back in hues more marvelous than before. All those who dwelt in Aman were filled with wonder and delight at the work of Fëanor, and Varda hallowed the Silmarils, so that thereafter no mortal flesh, nor hands unclean, nor anything of evil will might touch them, but it was scorched and withered. And Mandos foretold that the fates of Arda, earth, sea, and air, lay locked within them. The heart of Fëanor was fast bound to these things that he himself had made. Okay, so there's a lot packed in there in terms of what these gemstones actually are. You could say, oh, they're just fancy rocks, right? Well, so that the mysteries of their substance, it's unclear exactly what they're in fact made of. And they look like diamonds, they look like crystal, right? But they're not diamonds. Okay, fine, they're diamonds. But it's not simply the mystery of the substance that they're made from that makes them so well, Varda hallows them, so they're hallowed, they're made holy. They contain the light of the blended light of the 2 trees, right? So remember the point about the lamps was they're a changeless light, and the point of the light of the 2 trees was that it waxes and wanes over the course of the day, so that it contains time. It's like the tree clock, right? And that the blended light comes basically at those 12-hour intervals, right? So Fëanor has captured the moment when the light blends. It's silver and gold, but yet it's more than that, right? Because it's not just, okay, so they're shining with light as if they're always lit, even when they're in the deepest treasury, they shine like stars. Okay, so they're starlights, but they're alive, or it's like that crystal was to the Silmarils, but as is the body to the children of Iluvatar, the house of its inner fire that is within it, and yet in all parts of it, and is its life. That these Silmarils are like unto the elves and men, in the sense that they are like unto the children of Iluvatar, composed of body and soul. Right? So they are living stones. How do you get to living stones from the blended light of the two trees? Let's hold that thought. I need to give you a few more pieces. Okay, so we have trees, light, water, body and soul, hallowed. The trees are, of course, killed by Ungoliant because Melkor steals the Silmarils and puts them in his crown, the Iron Crown. We're going to get to all of that because Beren and Luthien's story comes into, it's like all the tales of the older days are bound up with what happens because of the Silmarils, right? So these Silmarils are the Grail, maybe. They are the living gemstones that drive the entire story, but they're still not, there's still a lesser light to come from the two trees, and that is, of course, the sun and the moon. Because when Ungoliant sucks all the light out of the trees and they're dying, and Feanor is not willing to give up the Silmarils to heal the trees, but in fact, Melkor's already stolen the. Okay, we're going to get to Feanor's choices too, right? The trees are dying, but before they die, they give forth one last flower and one last fruit. So as they're dying, Telperion bore at last upon a leafless bough one great flower of silver, and Laurelin a single fruit of gold. Then these Yavanna took, and then the trees died. Their lifeless stems stand yet in Valinor, a memorial of vanished joy. But the flower and the fruit Yavanna gave to Aula, and Manwë hallowed them, and Aula and his people made vessels to hold them and preserve their radiance, as it is said in the Narsillion, the song of the sun and the moon. These vessels the Valar gave to Varda, that they might become lamps of heaven, outshining the ancient stars, being nearer to Arda, and she gave them power to traverse the lower regions of Ilmen, and set them to voyage upon appointed courses above the girdle of the earth from the west and to the east, and to return. Now, what's interesting about... Okay, so now we have the sun and the moon, right? And the sun and the moon... Okay, the Silmarils are not the sun and the moon. They don't become the sun and the moon. They are themselves, although one of them becomes the morning star, Arendelle, effectively, right? But what we get from the two trees are the flower of silver, which becomes the moon, which is masculine, interestingly, because Telperion bore the flower of silver and Laurelin the fruit of gold, and the moonflower is put in a ship that's captained by Isil the Sheen. I'm sorry. I really will get these names right for you. Isil the Sheen, the Vanir of old, named the moon, and the captain of the moon ship, or the moon island, was Tilion, right? So we have Isil steered by Tilion, which is the moonflower. The important thing here is that the moon is masculine, right? So as with, for example, the Man in the Moon poem that we talked about back in summer, we were talking about the Ents, which are also trees, which also come into this. You're starting to recognize that part of the reason I can't tell you these things directly, it's like, well, because it's not allegory. Tolkien means this to mean this to mean this to mean this, and there we have unlocked the key. What you have to do is think in terms of these lineages of images, right? That the images are alive, like trees, giving forth flowers and fruit, and these flowers and fruits ramify. Watch my metaphors, right? I know those those of you who watch Owen's live streams are attuned to the power of metaphor, right? It's like every single word matters, and every single word that Tolkien uses to talk about these things matters too. So we're talking about substance when we say we don't know what the Silmarils are. That's a clue, right? That Tolkien thinks in all of his stories in terms of trees, right? All of his images ramify as creatures of life, right? He is not just thinking in terms of artifacts that are made things and dead and lifeless, stocks and stones, right? They are, in fact, creatures that participate in the life of Arda always, right? And so the death of the trees, the trees die because Ungoliant sucks all their light out of them, is an abomination, right? Remember, they were hallowed, and sacred. Therefore, when Ungoliant sucks the light out of the trees and kills them, she creates an abomination in the land of the blessed, right? Because these holy things all give forth life constantly, right? Even as they're dying, Telperion and Laurelin give out the flower and the fruit. Okay, so now that I've bungled it up, the sun and the moon. The moon is called Isil, and he's put on an island. The flower's put on an island steered by Tilion. The fruit of Laurelin is going to be called the sun, Anar, and Arian is a maiden chosen from among the Maiar to guide the vessel of the sun, right? So we have they've been given that Tilion actually gets to guide this island of the moon, and Arian the maiden gets to guide the ship of fire, right? Okay, there's a number of things to notice there other than the gendering of the sun and the moon, that they are not. The storyteller goes on to explain how Tilion is wayward and uncertain in speed and held not to his appointed path, and he sought to come near Arian, being drawn by her splendor. And so the story also accounts for the fact that the moon chases the sun, as it were. But notice that they are still at this point in the story, it's flat Earth, right? And they're sailing in the heavens, as it were. Okay. So now we have the sun and the moon associated now with the trees and the light. Why on earth should this look like a candelabra? All right, there's a mystery here. What mystery is here? Well, let's unpack a little bit, right? And you know that my practice over the last several episodes has been to show you where the scriptures are doing this story. Let's look at the scriptures, because you know what's in there. How deeply do you know what's in there, and what do you think Tolkien did with all of this imagery? Well, first, notice that the account of the Silmarillion in terms of light and the making of light follows Genesis 1 perfectly, right? Because you remember that always everyone says the problem is, what do we do with the fact that, just double checking because I always make mistakes and then I feel embarrassed, and then you all got, okay, that it's not until the fourth day in Genesis 1 that you get the sun and the moon, right? It's like, and everybody always has that question. It's like, where did the light come from before the sun and the moon? And Tolkien, in his desire yet again to make sure that he is telling the story so that it can be accepted by a mind who believes in the Blessed Trinity, matches in the Silmarillion exactly the coming into being of the sun and the moon, in the sense that it's a later part of the story, which also fits in his story with the creation of human beings, right? So in Genesis 1, you have, on the first day, God created the heaven and earth and said, be light made, and light was made, right? So we had those lamps early on, and it's changeless light, right? It's just light, which then Melkor casts down, and you can say, okay, so now we have darkness. The darkness falls on Arda, and there's great sort of tumult and so forth. And remember always in the story of the Silmarillion, the premise is that the Ainur, before they became the Valar, have already sung the whole thing, right? So there is this relationship between the music of the Ainur, the music of creation. It's not just at the beginning. It's like playing all along throughout all of the stories. So even into the Lord of the Rings, you're still in the music, right? The music is absolutely always there. And then the events that play out are only in time insofar as the Valar, the Ainur, have entered into the creation to become the Valar. Although strictly speaking, the reckoning of time can't start until there's that changeability with the light, allegedly, right? But we are matching very, very closely with the days of creation as described in Genesis 1. So we have the first day, God makes light. The second day, we divide the firmament, right? We make a firmament between the waters above and the waters below. So you could say that that kind of cataclysm that follows the creation, the darkening of the lamps, is mapping onto the disturbances that come in the second day. The third day, we have the dry land appear, the gathering together of the seas, and God saw that it was good. And so all of these tumults, right? Again, they match very nicely. So in the overthrow of the mighty pillars, those are the lights, right? Lands were broken and seas arose in tumult. And when the lamps were spilled, destroying flame was poured out over the earth. And the shape of Arda and the symmetry of its waters and its land was marred in that time. So that the first designs of the Valar were never after restored. In the confusion and darkness, Melkor escaped, right? But you could say, right, whatever happens on the creation on the third day, calling the dry land and gathering together the seas and so forth, it's quite cataclysmic, potentially, right? And he said, let the earth bring forth the green herb and such as may seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after its kind. And so it was done, and the earth brings forth fruit, right? So there's the tumult, and then Yavanna goes onto that green mound and sings the trees into being, right? So I love that it fits exactly with Genesis, right? It's like the story actually has to fit in the way in which the scriptures tell it, because there is only one story, and the elves have, as you would say, a fuller version of what happens in the midst of this story, but the events match exactly to what happens in the Bible, right? So that, in fact, so we've had, it's like Yavanna sung the trees into being, which will be, say, on the third day of creation. Things happen that we don't know about as human beings. And then on the fourth day, God said, let there be lights made in the firmament of heaven to divide the day and the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, to shine in the firmament of heaven and to give light upon the earth. And it was so done. And God made two great lights, a greater light to rule the day and a lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And he set them in the firmament of heaven to shine upon the earth and to rule the day and the night and to divide the light and the darkness. And God saw that it was good. Okay, so now in the parallel story of the Silmarillion, that's when they take the silver flower and the golden fruit and make the sun and the moon, right? And so it fits within creation. And then it's after that, in Genesis, on the fifth day, you get the living creatures, birds and sea monsters, and you could say in the story of the Silmarillion, we have now more adventures with the elves into Arda, into Middle Earth. And then the human beings are going to show up in the story. And of course, in Genesis, the human beings, the men, come on the sixth day. Although there's already been a lot of story prior to that sixth day, right? So the creation is of light, and the trees and the sun and the moon matches perfectly with Genesis. So probably Tolkien means us to pay close attention to what else is going on in Genesis with trees, right? If we say, as he said with the two trees, the story of all the elder days is caught up with the truth of these two trees. Well, there are two trees in Genesis, right? And this is where it's interesting, because of course Laurel and Telperion are not the trees in the Garden of Eden, clearly, right? Those are two different trees. And yet you're thinking about what's the association that Tolkien is trying to get you to remember all along is trees light, trees light, trees light, trees carry light. Light is knowledge, right? And so there's the two trees that are, of course, in the Garden of Eden, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And in the temptation, the serpent convinces Eve that She wants to be like a god. Knowing good and evil, right? Your eyes shall be open to knowing good and evil. Now, that eyes being open is very, very important in the imagery in the Old Testament, because eyes being open is deeply associated in the ancient tradition with wisdom, right? And if you think about, what do I need to show you to convince you that eyes open is wisdom? That in the book of Proverbs, maybe y'all should get your Bibles while I'm reading, right? It's like, in the book of Proverbs, the wisdom comes out and says to them at the entrance of the gates of the city, O children, how long will you love childishness, and fools covet those things which are hurtful to themselves, and the unwise hate knowledge. That the imagery that we know, particularly from certain statues that have been found by the archaeologists in Jerusalem, is that there are statues of a character shown with giant eyes, right? And when you think about the way Jesus talked about saying things, those who have ears to hear, let them hear; those who have eyes to see, let them see. The hearing and the seeing and the eyes being opened, that's what the serpent says, you'll know good and evil, and knowing good and evil means your eyes are then opened. So eating of the fruit of the tree opens your eyes. You all know Jordan Peterson made a lot of this imagery, but it's far deeper than just, okay, now you know who you are, to be ashamed and so forth. Like it's actually participating very, very deeply in this tradition that's visible throughout the Old Testament of associating trees with wisdom. And the most important place of all that we have that association is in the book of Sirach, in the book of Ecclesiasticus. And this is a book that modern Christians sometimes seem to know. Medieval Christians would have known the passage that I'm about to read you pretty much by heart, because it provides the lessons in the liturgy for the feasts of the Virgin Mary, right? And you think about the sort of Lady of the Tree. We're getting some imagery in there, but what I'm wanting you to hear right now is the association of wisdom with all of these trees, right? So she is there, so she said in Proverbs, she's standing at the gates of the city calling to her children, saying, give up this foolishness. And in Ecclesiasticus, that's where she is, right? She says, from the beginning and before the world was I created, and unto the world to come I shall not cease to be, and in the holy dwelling place I have ministered before him. Remember how Varda hallows the trees, right? That these trees are incredibly holy, the two trees. I'm sorry. I'm double checking that it's Varda who hallows them. Varda hoards the vats in great light, and I know I read that. I'm going to make you all as like anxious as I am about getting every reference right. Yavanna sings them into being, and Varda hoards them and hallows them. Okay, so the trees are associated with wisdom and the growth and the seeing and the light, and here they are, hallowed. Ecclesiasticus again. And so I was established in Zion, and in the holy city likewise I rested, and my power was in Jerusalem. Remember what Jerusalem looks like. It's a mountain, right? And it's the holy city there. And this is, in Tolkien's telling, the Silmarillion, they're in the blessed realm on a mound. They built their city in the midst of the plain beyond the mountains. They built their city, and there's a green mound there, right? So these trees are growing on this mound in the city where the Valar are. And I took root in an honorable people, and in the portion of my God his inheritance, and my abode is in the full assembly of saints. Now trees. I was exalted like a cedar in Lebanon, and as a cypress tree on Mount Zion. I was exalted like a palm tree in Cades, and as a rose plant in Jericho. As a fair olive in the plains, and as a plane tree by the water in the streets was I exalted. I gave a sweet smell like cinnamon and aromatical balm. I yielded a sweet odor like the best myrrh. And I perfumed my dwelling as storax and galbanix and onyx and aloes, and as the frankincense not cut, and my odor is as the purest balm. I have stretched out my branches as the turpentine tree, and my branches are of honor and grace. As the vine I have brought forth a pleasant odor, and my flowers are the fruit of honor and riches. I am the mother of fair love, and of fear, and of knowledge, and of holy hope. In me is all grace of the way, and of the truth. In me is all hope of life and of virtue. Come over to me, all ye that desire me, and be filled with my fruits. For my spirit is sweet above honey, and my inheritance above honey and the honeycomb. My memory is unto everlasting generations. They that eat me shall yet hunger, and they that drinketh me shall yet thirst. He that hearkeneth to me shall not be confounded, and they that work by me shall not sin. They that explain me shall have life everlasting. Okay, so you see, Tolkien works like the scriptures do. It's like you get everything bundled up into these images, right? So we have the different trees, we have the incense that rises up as prayers in the Psalms. We have the wonderful smells, and it's in this that you have the knowledge and the sweetness, and those who explain me shall have everlasting life. All right, so we have this incredible association between trees and wisdom. Where do we get the light? Now this is where JM was actually like spot on. He's absolutely right to see this. Let's it's a temple image, right? We tend to think of the temple images as Jewish, but they're actually Christian because they're in the Old Testament, and this is our Bible, right? This is the Christian story. And notice that the tree of the Gondor white tree has it effectively has 7 lights, right? It has 7 branches. Well, it's not a menorah in the sense of the one used for the Hanukkah memorial, right? It's actually a 7-branched candelabra, just like God told Moses to make for the tabernacle, right? And that candelabra image is also furniture that was known to have been used in the temple, right? So it's a temple image, and it's a tree, right? So and this is what's funny is you don't necessarily think of candelabras, although I found pictures of them that are designed to look more like what this one is described as in Exodus, but they're explicitly trees of light, not just branched candelabras, but trees of light with fruit and nuts, right? They're actually are flowers and nuts. It's an almond tree. So what God tells Moses is, thou shalt make also this is in Exodus 25. Thou shalt make also a candlestick of beaten work and of the finest gold, the shaft thereof, and the branches, the cups, and the bowls, and the lilies going forth from it. 6 branches shall come out of the sides, 3 out of one side and 3 out of the other. So that's literally the image of the white tree, right, that we have in our logo. So there's 3 branches on one side and 3 on the other. 3 cups, as it were, nuts to every branch, and a bowl withal, and a lily, and 3 cups likewise of the fashion of nuts in the other branch, and a bowl withal, and a lily. They're flowery. They're almond cups, right? So they're cups of light, right? You think they're oil lamps. I think they're oil lamps. Bowls, right? They're bowls of light. So we think of them as candelabra, but they're bowls of light held in golden almond blossoms. 6 such shall be the work of the 6 branches that are to come out of the shaft, and in the candlestick itself shall be 4 cups in the manner of a nut, and at every one bowls and lilies. Bowls under 2 branches in 3 places, which together make 6 coming forth, out of one shaft. And both the bowls and the branches shall be of the same beaten work of the purest gold. Thou shalt make also 7 lamps, and shall set them upon the candlestick to give light over against. The snuffers also, where the snuffings are put out, should be purest gold. And it concludes, look and make it according to the pattern that was shown thee in the mount. Right? This is a heavenly image. Moses is being shown the designs, all the designs. The temple furniture, tabernacle furniture that he's going to make. And the candelabra is explicitly a tree, right? So it's not just the number of branches and so forth that match here. It's the idea of a tree. Well, I say this is a Christian image. You should recognize this tree, right? You should recognize this shining tree of light, because of course it's there in the end of the story as well. It is shown first on the mountain to Moses. So the volcano, right? It's got all the lightning and thunder and everything coming out of it. And the tree, the shining light, wisdom-giving, blossoming tree is there at the end of the story as well in Revelation, right? It's like when the heavenly Jerusalem comes down, you have among the features of this heavenly Jerusalem, we see a river of water of life. This is chapter 22 in Revelation. This is a very scripture heavy exercise today, right? So I'm gonna convince you that Tolkien thinks always in scriptural images, and I have some more proofs to show you that he has access to this imagery, not just in the scriptures that he would know from participating in the liturgy and so forth as a Catholic, but actually in the text that he translated in his own scholarship, right? So we're going to get there, and you're going to see that all of these images are activated constantly by Tolkien in his own storytelling. So we have here in chapter 22 in Revelation, within the city, the heavenly city of Jerusalem, which is covered with gemstones, right? Gemstones are very, very significant in the description of the heavenly Jerusalem. And interestingly enough, the city at this point has no sun and moon, right? Have you ever thought about that? In the temple itself is filled with the light of the Lamb, right? So we get the gemstones, all the gemstones that the heavenly city is arrayed in, and its streets of gold and pearly gates, right? You've heard the pearly gates, right? Well, the pearly gates are one feature of the walls of the heavenly city. But there's no temple in the heavenly city at all, because the Lord God Almighty is the temple and the Lamb. And the city hath no need of the sun, nor of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God hath enlightened it, and the Lamb is the lamp thereof. Now, so I think this is what, it's interesting that the sun and the moon come late in Genesis, 4th day, right? And they also come late in Tolkien's telling of the story, and that you have a period in paradise, as it were, in the blessed realm, when there is no sun and moon, there's just light, right, of the trees. Well, in Revelation, we have no sun or moon, the light of the Lamb is the lamp, and the nations shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth shall bring their glory and honor into it. Well, along with this glowing lamb, right, this bright shining lamb, we have this. And he showed me a river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding from the throne of God and of the Lamb, right? So there's the Lamb on the throne, and there's this river coming out from the throne of the Lamb. And in the midst of the street thereof, on both sides of the river, was the tree of life, bearing 12 fruits, yielding its fruits every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. All right, so you need to have all these images in your head. We have this heavenly city covered in gems. I don't know whether I want to name all the gemstones. That gets us into another another sort of meditation. But notice gemstones, right? This heavenly city covered in gemstones. The lamb is there shining, and there's a magic tree with a crystal river, right? When you, I mean, seriously, you want to write fantasy literature and you don't read the Bible, you're missing out, because when Tolkien was imagining this story, right, this magnificent, everybody wants to say, I want to write fantasy literature. Well, you really need to read the Bible, because what Tolkien is doing is reactivating the images that come from this scriptural tradition, and the scriptural tradition is filled with the magic of all of the kinds of things that he's trying to show us, right? Okay, so we have now, how did I say, the story of Genesis. So you need to know the story of Genesis, acknowledge the existence of the trees of the knowledge of good and evil, right, which matters. Know that there is deep tree imagery in the tradition associated with wisdom. And I'm going to do an episode on the lady, right? The lady is also associated with wisdom, and you'll get that that's a tree too, which therefore makes sense that it's Yavanna and Varda and Galadriel that are all associated with trees. I'm not doing that right now. And the candelabra in the temple is a light tree, and there's this tree in the heavenly Jerusalem that is covered in different flowers and fruits, right? Why gemstones, right? I think I you could say, okay, fine, the heavenly Jerusalem is covered in gemstones, right? But do we really need the Silmarils to be a gemstone? Well, there's another piece of the puzzle back in Genesis. You know that crystal river that we just saw flowing from the throne of the Lamb, and the trees that are for the healing of nations. So that image of the river flowing from the garden is also extremely significant. And this is in the second Genesis story of creation, chapter 2. It's like in Genesis 1 we have the creation of human beings in the image and likeness, right? And everybody says, oh, and there's two stories of creation. Well, in the second elaboration of the creation, we have the creation of man from the slime of the earth. Lord God formed man of the slime of the earth, breathed into his face the breath of life, and man became a living soul. That's chapter 2:7. And the Lord God had planted a paradise of pleasure from the beginning, wherein he placed the man whom he had formed. So we're going to see that Tolkien reiterates this creation with the elves and the men too, that he just has the elves wake up by a lake, right? And the men sort of show up. He's unwilling to recreate Genesis on stage, as it were, so they somehow awake, right? And we've had Ale already making his dwarves in a similar thing. So they're made out of clay, and breath of life is given them, and then the man is placed in a paradise, right? And the Lord God brought forth of the ground all manner of trees, fair to behold and pleasant to eat, and pleasant to eat of. The tree of life also in the midst of paradise, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? So the point of the paradise is its trees, and it has these two trees. And a river went out of the place of pleasure to water paradise, which from thence is divided into 4 heads. Okay, good. So we have trees, river. The name of the one is Phison, that is it which compasseth all the land of Heveloth, where gold groweth. Gold, right? Gemstones and gold come from paradise, which is therefore, so you've got all of these things coming into this moment when Tolkien is trying to get you to see that in the Silmarils. They're filled with the living light. Okay, but we still got some more steps to go. Okay, gold. And the gold of that land is very good. There is found bdellium and the onyx stone. They're red and green stones. And the name of the second river is Gihon. The same is it that compasseth all the land of Ethiopia. And the name of the third river is Tigris. The same passeth along by the Assyrians. And the fourth river is Euphrates. And the Lord God took man and put him into the paradise of pleasure to dress it and to keep it. Okay, so we have the trees, and the river of paradise flows with gold and gemstones. Now, this is in fact true in the sort of real world, in the sense that gemstones are found in the rivers of India. And medieval Christians were very aware of this, right? That they have these stories of the gemstones coming from the rivers of paradise. In fact, therefore, in medieval understanding, which of course Tolkien is always just habitually thinking in terms of, because it's the text that he worked with his whole life. We have with the gemstones pieces of paradise, right? So it makes more sense, right, that Tolkien would, if he's making this tree of light, we're trying to match the story of creation, and there is this holiness to the blessed land, blessed realm, and these trees of light are like the candelabra in the temple. All of that makes sense. And now we have the gemstones. But why are they alive, right? Why are they something that you would have say that they're like living creatures? Well, here I need you to make a bigger leap. I realize there's one great leap in all of this, is saying, is like, look, the Silmarillion is basically retelling of Genesis. Or no, it's actually retelling of the whole of the Bible, right? There's a lot of Genesis imagery in it. There's a lot of wisdom imagery in it. The light imagery. There's a lot of, the growing things, the trees and the land and so forth. Creation imagery. Now, I want you to see that there's spiritual imagery in it as well. And Verlyn Flieger, whom I mention a lot because she's really brilliant scholar on this imagery, she doesn't tend to go this far when she's talking about the light imagery, because she's trying to stay at the sort of philosophical, mythological level. One, as a Christian myself, I'm, sympathetic to this step, but also I do take very, very seriously the claim that Tolkien constantly made. Well, constantly. He makes it enough in his letters to feel like it's constant, that he wanted his stories to fit with the reality that he experienced as a Christian, right? And I have two of his texts. One, so just in Leaf by Niggle, his story of Leaf by Niggle, the painter, right? And I haven't mentioned this story for a long time. I talked about it at the very beginning. And we probably still need to do a close analysis of that. But the painter Niggle wants to paint a tree, and Tolkien painted a tree. Let's see, what's curious about this tree is all of the flowers on it are different, right? And you remember what the tree in Revelation is like. It has fruits, all these fruits. If I put this down, I'm going to lose my place. Oh, no, I won't. I still. When we have in Revelation. Oh, also, just recognize, I have to keep pacing back and forth in the book. It's got, the tree in Revelation has 12 fruits, and the fruits are born each month, right? And in my head, I made them all different because, well, they ought to be. In fact, what Tolkien has Niggle wanting to do is, he used to spend a lot of time on a single leaf, trying to catch its shape, its sheen, the glistening of dewdrops on its edges. You catch there the imagery that Tolkien was playing off of. It's like trees look like they are glistening with light. If you watch, particularly beech trees, if you think about what he says Laurelin and Tilparian are meant to look like, that Laurelin has this silver dew, and the other bore leaves of a young green like the new opened beech, and the edges were of glittering gold. If you see trees in the sunlight, and the leaves are shimmering, right, they do seem to catch light, right? And then Tolkien has Niggle wanting to paint the glistening of dewdrops on its edges, like water, light, trees. It's all constantly for him in his imagination, in his scene. Yet Niggle wanted to paint a whole tree with all of its leaves in the same style and all of them different, right? So Tolkien, this is one of Tolkien's own drawings, and he plays out this desire to do this, sort of magnificent variety, this beautiful variety. Why would he want to have that kind of gem-like quality to his trees? Well, another of the texts that Tolkien spent a lot of time on, other than Beowulf, right, is a poem called The Pearl, or just Pearl, right? And it's a 14th century poem. It's along with Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, one of the greatest works of late medieval poetry. This is alliterative verse, and it's written in Middle English, but Tolkien does a translation into modern English. And in this poem, there is this magnificent re-envisioning of the scene in Revelation that we were just looking at, right? That the scene of the Lamb is there in the midst of the gemmed city, and the Lamb is the source of light. And then in the poem in the Pearl, we have all of the saints surrounding the Lamb. And the pearl itself, the pearl of the poem, is the author's little girl who seems to have died when she was like 2 years old, right? So the Lamb is there in his gemmed city, filling it with light, and then surrounded by, well, what, right? So first, of the sun and moon they had no need, for God himself was their sunlight. The Lamb their lantern was indeed, and through him blazed that city bright. That unearthly clear did no light impede, their wall and hall thus passed my sight. The throne on high there might one heed, with all its rich adornment dight, and in John in chosen words did write. High God himself sat on that throne, whence forth a river ran with light, outshining both the sun and moon. Neither sun nor moon ever shone so sweet as the pouring flood from that court that flowed. Swiftly it swept through every street, and no filth nor soil nor slime it showed. No church was there to greet the sight to greet, nor chapel nor temple there ever abode. The Almighty was their minister meet, refreshment the victim Lamb bestowed. The gates ever open to every road were never yet shut from noon to noon. There enters none to find abode who bears any spot beneath the moon. The moon therefrom may gain no might, too spotty is she, of form too hoar. Moreover, there comes never night. Why should the moon in circles soar, and compare her with that peerless light that shines upon the water's shore? The planets are in too poor a plight. Yea, the sun himself too pale and frore, on shining trees where those waters pour. 12 fruits of light, there ripen soon, 12 times a year they be to store, and renew them anew in every moon. Okay, so we have, I need you to get all of this in your head so that I can show you. I think I've got all the pieces left. Not quite, there's one more. All right, so we have this poetic image that Tolkien himself translated, so it's in this Middle English poem of a description of heaven, right? And we have the Lamb shining, in the city, brighter than the sun and moon, brighter than all the lights, and he's surrounded by these trees, and it's a gem city. But what's the Lamb? That's what you should be really, really wondering about. And the tree and the Lamb, well, what is it? And you know what a monstrance looks like? I wish I had one. I have something that's a little bit close, right? You notice where she stands when I go from the cover pages to my Mary is standing right by that tree. She's there on purpose under the tree because she is that tree. But what is a monstrance, right? It's kind of these sunbeams with something in the center. It's kind of meant to be shining, alive, meant to be brilliantly white. Well, it's the bread of the host, right? Which is, if you think of what the image in the image of Revelation is, right? It's the Lamb there, shining white. There's no need for any temple, because the Lamb is sitting there on its throne and shining bright and shining bright and shining bright. Well, of course, it's the Lamb who is sacrificed, right? Go back to Revelation 4 when we get the Lamb on his throne. And again, if you want to understand Tolkien, you need to memorize Revelation. And here's where we have that gemstone, right? This is the vision that John has of the throne for the first time, right? And he sees the one on the throne being adored. I keep reading you too long passages, so I'm right, okay. So immediately I was in the spirit, and behold, there was a throne set in heaven, and upon the throne one sitting. And he that sat was to the sight like the jasper and the sardine stone. And there was a rainbow round about, and the throne in sight like unto an emerald. Remember, I said that it would make more sense if the Silmarils were green, right? But I think also, because my big argument here is that Tolkien's thinking of the Silmarils as containers for the host, right? That they need to look like the gemstones that would be in a well, they're reliquaries in the Middle Ages that have pieces of the cross and things like that, and those also work in this argument, right? That you're seeing the light shining out from a crystal, right? But recognize it for Christian understanding, that is what the Lamb looks like, this shining stone, right? The stone is the Lamb. There's a Grail-like image in this too, because the Grail is in some of the stories a kind of stone, right? An altar stone, a gemstone of paradise, which I've been talking about within my Telegram chat. We're making a story that has this gemstone in there, but the Lamb on his throne, who is in fact the Lamb who is sacrificed and crucified, and is Christ, right? Is like a light-filled gem, right? He that sat was to the sight like the jasper and the sardine stone, and there was a rainbow round about the throne in sight like unto an emerald. Then there's the 24 elders around the throne. From the throne proceeded lightnings and voices and thunders, and there were 7 lamps burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. There's the lamp tree again, right? So you have the shining stone, the 7 lamped candelabra, and the sight of the throne was, and in the sight of the throne was as it were a sea of glass like to crystal, and in the midst of the throne and round about the throne were 4 living creatures full of eyes before and behind. And we have the living creatures, and they're singing to God. And then I saw in the midst of the throne and of the 4 living creatures, and in the midst of the ancients, a lamb standing as it were slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent forth into the earth. And he takes the book and so forth, so that we have, and then at the end of the vision in the heavenly Jerusalem, the Lamb is there in the midst of the city, and you have no need of the sun and the moon, because the Lamb is the light. Remember how I suggested how important it was in the description of the Silmarils I'm letting you absorb all this while I find my page again. In the description of the Silmarils, that it was not known of what substance. Now, if you have ever tried to wrestle with the question of transubstantiation, you know that substance is a charged word in this kind of setting, right? And so this mystery of the substance of the Silmarils that are like unto crystal and can contain this living fire, but we're really not sure what substance they are, and the substance contains the light. I think what Tolkien has in his mind right now is a monstrance with its beams of light, right? The typically monstrances for holding the host have those like wonderful beams of light coming out from them, and in the center is that crystal. And the mystery, of course, for Catholics, and we'll know from, do I have to prove that to you right now? Will you just trust me on this one? Tolkien says he, whenever he went to Mass regularly, he participates in the adoration of the host regularly, and that he tells his son Michael that this is all the drama in the world that he needs in his life, is all the drama that Michael would look for in romance is actually in the host. And remember, for Tolkien, the story of the Silmaril is the story of the Elder Days is utterly bound up in the story of these two trees. But now we've seen that the two trees give the light that makes the life in the Silmarils, and the Silmarils are the thing that holds that light imperishable. It's like I need you also to make lots of leaps about what the bodies of the saints are like in heaven and that their gemstones like and such. But we'll just stick with the Lamb for the moment. That the Lamb is like unto this shining crystal as well, because, and that's what the monstrances are meant to try to show, is the light of the glory of the reality of God's presence in the host. Now, I know, tee-hee, those of you who have struggled with this kind of mystery as Catholics might feel a little oppressed right now, or not. Maybe you're delighted, right? The mystery is the one that Christianity is constantly trying to solve, which I've been talking to you about, of the incarnation, right? Of the entering of God into matter, which is what the Silmarils are also trying to do. How can something be light is life? How can that be captured in something material and physical, the substance? What does it mean to be alive, filled with the breath of life, right? We are creatures of God, filled with his breath, somehow, his word. We breathe it out, and yet we're this physical substance that is yet living, right? The Silmarils, I think, for Tolkien, just as for Christians, the host, are meant to be this literally this encapsulation of this mystery of the body and soul, right? The matter and spirit, the being alive with the breath of God, and yet also somehow physical. Now, there's another layer, and I haven't completely overwhelmed you with references and tellings of the relationship between gemstones and trees, which would be in another poem that Tolkien would definitely know about. The Pearl poem, the one that Tolkien translate, this Del Rey one, this Del Rey copy is so funny, right? Because we've got the Green Knight, which the Green Knight is a great mystery too, of this kind of sacramental reality of the spiritual truth in the material realm, and it's actually a mystery of courtliness. It's not, in fact, of the wildness in quite the way that sometimes people talk about. But in any case, trees, gemstones. Tolkien would also have had, my guess is, in his thinking about all of this imagery, The Dream of the Rood, which is a very famous Anglo-Saxon poem, Old English poem, about the sufferings of the cross at the crucifixion, right? And the poem starts with the cross speaking, or a dreamer hears the cross speaking. And what's interesting about the cross in the opening is what it looks like. Listen, I will speak of the best of dreams. Remember, dreams are everything. We did all those episodes on dreams and time travel and such. Okay, this is a dream. Tolkien's going to be thinking about it. I will speak the best of dreams, the sweetest vision that crossed my sleep in the midst of the night when speech bearers lay in silent rest. I seemed to see a wondrous tree lifting up in the air, wound with light, the brightest of beams, The radiant sign was wrapped in gold. Gems stood gleaming at its feet. 5 stones shining from its shoulder beam. A host of angels beheld its beauty, fair though the ordained, ongoing creation. This was not outlaws, gallows, criminals, cross, holy spirits, angels, men on earth. All creation stood watching that wondrous tree. The victory beam was beautiful, bright, and shining, but I was stained with sin. I saw the tree of glory sheathed in gems, clothed in gold, jewels gleaming on the Lord's tree. Yet through that gold I could see the ancient agony of the wretched, the suffering and struggle, since it first began to sweat blood from its right side. Now, in the poem, which I feel like I've given you a lot of text to absorb, so I'll save you and maybe read more of it later. In the rest of the poem, you have the story of the crucifixion and the bleeding of the tree, which I think just occurred. I always hope I get to a place where I think something I haven't thought of yet before. I think is why Tolkien had to have Ungoliant eat the light, because you can't have a story in which simply the 2 trees give forth their light. One, you need the sun and the moon, and we need a sort of device to get the sun and the moon into the creation. But I think there's also this sense that the trees, Laurelin and Telperion, need to suffer and be sacrificed in some way, because the cross itself, this gem-laden, gem-studded, shining tree of victory, is also the tree on which our Lord and Savior died. And that, for me, is the key to all of the mysteries that try to ramify, from Tolkien's meditating on these trees. It's like, recognize that the significant thing about Telperion and Laurelin is somehow the White Tree of Gondor comes from them, right? And it takes a lineage. It takes, a tree of trees. They're not, in fact, directly descended from Telperion. They're descended from an image of Telperion, which is significant, right? Galathilion, which was a tree that Yavanna made in the likeness of Telperion to give to the elves who were living in the Blessed Realm in Tuna. And this tree, Galathilion, grew in the city of the elves. It had a seedling, Celeborn, which was planted on Erisea, where the Teleri, the ship elves, were living. Again, we'll get some more breakdown of elves, and in case your elvish lore is not as perfectly memorized as maybe some others. So we have Galathilion in Tuna, which is where the Noldor are living. Celeborn in Erisea, the Lonely Isle, which was where the Teleri are living. There's a seedling that comes from Celeborn that's given to the Númenóreans, which they plant in Númenor, that's Nimloth the Fair. That Nimloth has a fruit, and that becomes the White Tree of Minas Ithil, which then is the withered tree that you get in Gondor, right, in this beginning of the story. And Aragorn, of course, finds a sapling of that tree, of the White Tree of Minas Ithil, and he replants it, and so that's the symbol of his kingship, right? So that his kingship is actually descended in a direct line from the tree that's made in the image and likeness of the tree Telperion. Well, in the medieval legends of the cross, there's a similar sort of lineage, and it goes back to the tree of life in paradise, right? And this would be from it's a version of the story that's told, be very, very famous in the Middle Ages, was told in what was called the Golden Legend, the Legenda Ario. It's reading for the liturgy for the lives of the saints, and it's this kind of sort of cascading of associations. I tried to show you that cascading of associations through the scripture, right? You go from Genesis to Revelation, and you expect to see the same images brought back in over and over again, right? All of those images are in Revelation because they're there in the scriptures, right? You have the 7-branch candelabra in front of the throne of the Lamb, and the crystal river flowing from the throne of the Lamb, and the tree of life with its fruits for the healing of nations, because they were there in paradise. Everything always connects back up because we're always in the same story, and the pattern that was shown to Moses on the mountain is going to shimmer throughout reality always, right? So you should start expecting to find these sorts of wonderful lineages and associations because we're all in the same story related. And for medieval Christians, when they're reverencing the relics of the cross, which they're pieces of them, and I said before that sometimes they're put in crystals like the host, right, and the monstrance. Sometimes they're reliquaries of the cross that will have similar sort of gemstones filled with a piece of the cross. Well, the belief was that that was the cross that was found by Constantine's mother Helena when she digs it up in Jerusalem. And there's a throwaway line that, you know, there's so many pieces of the cross that you can make a whole ark with them. There aren't. There's a study that was done a Frollo, please let that be right, that I did it off the top of my head, that he cataloged all of the different references to pieces of the cross and would probably make about a beam. So it is entirely possible that the relics of the cross that are authenticated, and you realize this is a reliquary problem too, right? You authenticate those relics of the cross that come from the piece of the cross that Helena found in Jerusalem, which is the same beam on which Jesus died. What if that tree went all the way back to paradise, right? And that was the way the medieval story went, that when Adam lay dying in paradise, not in paradise, outside of paradise, right? Seth went to the gate, his son Seth went to the gate of paradise and begged a shoot from the tree of mercy. An angel gave him a shoot from the tree under which Adam and Eve sinned. When it bore fruit, Adam would be made whole, right? So it's an image of like when this image carries the fruit that is Christ, Adam will be restored. Seth planted a shoot over Adam's grave. This grew to a great tree that was still standing in King Solomon's time. It's always, everything is like referencing to the previous story, and it's like, so remember, like Telperion, you're going to be able to recite that now. Telperion, Galathilion, Celeborn, Nimloth, the White Tree of Minas-Ithil, and the sapling that's planted by Aragorn. Well, similarly, the stories of the tree of the cross go from the tree of mercy that's in paradise, which is planted over Adam's grave. That grew to a great tree that was standing in Solomon's time. Solomon, King Solomon, who's supposed to be building the temple, which is patterned on the tabernacle, which the pattern of which is shown to Moses on the mountain. Solomon cut down the tree to use it in building his forest home. It's called the House of the Forest of Lebanon, built out of cedar. 1 Kings 7, if you want that story. But the beam didn't fit any place, so it was thrown into a pool to serve as a bridge. First it's being thrown over a pond to serve as a bridge. The Queen of Sheba, when she comes you thought the Bible was boring. The Queen of Sheba comes, or actually, you thought the Middle Ages were boring, prophesies that the man by whose death the kingdom of the Jews would be destroyed would hang on this wood. And so the Jews bury it in this story. It's in the pool called Probatica, which wells up there. That pool referenced in the Gospel of John 5:2. The wood is floated to the surface of the pond, and the Jews use it in making Jesus's cross. To make it even more complicated, there's also a legend that the cross itself is made of multiple wood, so that you have a palm tree, cedar, cypress, and olive. Recognize, again, the mixturing of trees that we get from Ecclesiasticus, right? That there's a mystery in this proliferation of trees, which in the back of your mind you should be thinking about ants and how their variety and everything like that too, right? So we'll get to the Green Man, and okay, fine. That the thing I want you to be holding in your mind now is, one, the way in which all of this imagery fits together, right? Between the creation of light, the trees as candelabra, the candelabra as trees holding light, the relationship between these trees and wisdom, the relationship between the light and the heavenly city and the throne and the altar and the gemstones, the association between the gemstones and the trees, and particularly the tree of the cross, and the way this lineage of the tree of the cross goes from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, under which Adam and Eve sinned, that becomes the tree on which Christ dies, and that therefore becomes the shining gemstone of the Dream of the Rood and the reliquaries that medieval Christians would know. I know, it's like gravy. Okay, fine, good. I hope so. You see why I am nonplussed by conspiracy theories that look for patterns. I'm kind of used to it. You're looking for I hope this delights you and doesn't just make you think I'm nuts. Well, maybe I am nuts in the sense of the foolishness of Christ, right? That you are expecting to find these associations because the pattern is always there, right? The pattern of creation, the pattern of the temple, the pattern of the heavenly Jerusalem is going to shine through all of the stories that Tolkien is telling, because he's taking them from the Bible, and the Bible is taking them, as we understand it as Christians, from reality made in the image and likeness of the heavenly designs. And you thought they were just pretty rocks. We get to talk about gemstones eventually, but I think I don't know what I'm coming up next. To be continued.